Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a great Wednesday. Welcome to How to Streamline HR Operations. My name is Kaylee Hansen. I'm the Marketing Campaigns Manager here at GoCo. So anything webinars is probably coming from me, most likely. We are so excited to be joined today by LeAnne. LeAnne, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm doing great today, Kaylee. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to hear this webinar today. To kick it off while people are still rolling in, why don't we in the chat share where we're tuning in from? I am from the hot and humid DFW area, so that is where I am right now. The sunshine is beautiful, but the heat is not my friend. What about you, LeAnne?
Well, I am coming to you from the hot and dry, not humid, West Texas area. I'm in
Oh,
Lubbock,
man.
Texas. So it's just probably just as hot, but not as humid.
Yeah, I get that. I was talking to someone earlier from Oklahoma and I was like, well, I'm in DFW. I get it. And he's like, oh yeah, you get it completely. So we have some Houston, Texas, some other Texans. Looks like we have people from all over today.
Yeah,
So
love it.
exciting. The numbers are dwindling a bit for people chiming in. So if you want, LeAnne, I'll pass it to you in just a second. But just for everyone else out there, I will be sending the recording and the slides after the webinar. So stay tuned for that. And then towards the end of the webinar, I will share the SHRM recertification code in the chat for everyone. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them in the chat or the designated Q&A section. And with that, LeAnne, are you ready to go?
Let's do it. Thanks so much,
Awesome.
Kaylee. Also, I was telling Kaylee before we started, I'm kind of notorious for not leaving as much room for Q&A. So if we don't get to your question and you'd like to just kind of go back and forth with me over email, I'm happy to do that. We'll make sure you have my contact information later. So I am pumped to get a chance to speak with you today about one of my very favorite topics, but really approaching it from, I think, a different lens than maybe we might be used to as HR leaders, as people leaders. And that is how to streamline operations, but really it's more about strategies, like bigger strategies that we can use that will get us to better outcomes when it comes to optimizing for time and cost and resources, which we know is huge, of course, in the HR, in the people field. So I would love if you would type in the chat, what do you feel like is your biggest challenge when it comes to streamlining processes? I know Kaylee and I were sharing a little bit before we started about some of the questions that had come in, and there were a couple that were like, oh, I just spend so much time having to react to employee questions or concerns, or drama was another word that we heard, and that just keeps me from really those day-to-day things that I need to be focusing on. There's so many challenges we're facing, but I'd love to hear in the chat maybe just a couple of examples. I'm seeing, system integration, change management, multiple platforms, chaos. I love that. I don't love chaos, but I love that that's how you captured that. Buy-in from leadership. We'll touch on that in just a little bit. Platform resources, absolutely. So here's the thing. Every single one of you who has joined the webinar today, you come from a different organization that has different vision, mission, values. You have a different, type of client that you're serving or a purpose that you're fulfilling. You all represent such diverse industries that it would be impossible for me to sort of give like really concrete and specific strategies that are going to work perfectly for your organization. If I could figure out how to do that, that'd be awesome. But what I really want to do today is to hopefully speak to some of these issues these challenges that you're expressing right now, but from a different angle. Okay. Because here's what we know as HR leaders, as people leaders, we're facing all sorts of challenges or almost barriers to our operational successes and our, efficiencies. When I survey HR leaders and people leaders about the common challenges they're facing, I'm just going to throw these up here. I'm preaching to the choir. This is your life you live every day. But things I hear the most are, man, we have so many manual processes. We're having a hard time figuring out how to automate, what to automate. Our technology feels insufficient. We don't have the right, systems in place. budget constraints, of course. Wow, it's so hard to keep up with, compliance, and, things are shifting. It feels like every single day. How do we optimize when that's the case? Oh my goodness, how even to keep our employees engaged and retained, because we know as, we retain them, that's going to save us time, energy, and resources too. How aligned we are strategically. That kind of touches a little bit of the buy-in that a couple of you mentioned as well. My favorite answer is people doing people things, which I think captures a lot that HR and people leaders face. And then I ran out of space. I ran out of space to sort of capture all these challenges that leaders face when they're thinking about how to optimize for time, for cost, for resources. And so that's really where I come in. And my background is in higher education. So I was a professor at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas for 14 years. And I trained and developed a lot of both students, but also a really large staff that I had. And the HR function fell under me. So I was, in addition to all of my other responsibilities and my administrative role in the college, I was also operating with the HR function. And just like so many of you, it weighed me down every single day to try to balance and get a good like rhythm with all the balls in the air for all the things that I was working on. Since 2017, I have been full-time HR consultant and keynote speaker. And so I specialize in helping leaders and organizations improve their employee engagement and retention. And I do that through the lens of internal communication. And so what you're going to hear from me today are strategies that are very communication centric. They're very people centric. That's going to always be my focus. That's my vibe. And I hope that by the end of this session that you feel equipped to go back to your organizations, back to your teams, and really start asking some good questions to improve your processes. So if I had to say what my thesis statement is, I was a public speaking professor, so I'll put my professor hat on. Here's my thesis statement: is strategies that work for HR leaders, and frankly, not just HR leaders, but if we're talking just about HR kind of optimization here, strategies that are going to work for us. And this is the important piece, that are going to also contribute to an exceptional employee experience are those that are going to free us up to do more of the things that technology can't. Now, I know that sounds, it sounds very idealistic, and it sounds, pie in the sky, or it sounds, maybe impossible from where you're sitting when you're thinking about what your day-to-day experiences are like. But what I want to encourage you with is that these strategies that I'm going to share today are strategies I've helped clients go through and implement in their organizations of all different sizes and scopes. And if they do the work, you start to see improvements immediately when it comes to your HR processes and workflows. So this is the overall goal. What we're going to talk about are, again, some people-centric, communication-centric strategies, how you can improve efficiency by designing an intentional and robust employee journey, which is an often overlooked part of the strategy here. And then also how to create some effective communication channels that equip you with better information to make informed decisions. So there we go. That's what we're up to. Let's talk about strategy number one. Now, keep in mind, this is communication-centric, employee-centric strategy. And the first one is that we want to audit and maximize our employee journey. Now, if you're unfamiliar with kind of the idea of the employee journey, just as like a kind of theoretical concept, here's a model, and I've sort of adapted it visually, but this model is rooted in research from the Gallup organization. And they're, again, one of the world's leading researchers in employee engagement and retention and workplace culture. And I really love the way that they sort of capture the employee journey, or the employee life cycle is another way to say that. So in this kind of idea, it would be, instead of us as HR leaders thinking about, just the routine tasks and kind of all the different things on our plate, that we're actually taking a much more strategic 30,000 foot view, and we're crafting really unique employee journeys for different segments of employees that we have. Now, I know that you're like, hey, you said you were going to help us streamline. It sounds like you're complicating things, but I promise you that when you engage in a process of auditing your employee journey and then segmenting, much like a marketer would do, like if you're thinking about a customer journey, what ends up happening is that you streamline processes. It's magic. It makes it just makes a tremendous difference in the way that your processes flow. So if you looked at this employee life cycle here and you think about, like, maybe try to imagine how your employee journey functions in your organization. Some of you might say, yeah, we have a really well-crafted journey where we're thinking strategically about how all of these phases play out and the different steps and the workflows and the pieces and how they fit together. Some of you may say, wow, we're doing really great in performance, performance management, or we've got really great departing processes in place. In fact, one of my clients, they employ a lot of part-time seasonal employees. And so when I was looking at this with them recently, they're like, oh, well, we've got the depart ones down because that's where we spend a lot of our time thinking through those processes. But wherever your organization is, my call to you would be that the strategy for optimizing here is to take that 30,000 foot view and really analyze and dig deep into your employee life cycle. Because when you do, like, why focus on it? Because when you do, one, and this is, again, not rocket science to you as HR leaders, but when you improve the overall employee experience and when you streamline the employee experience, that's going to mean higher engagement, higher retention. That naturally saves you time, money, and resources. But so many organizations, because we're just on that kind of hamster wheel in our operations, we end up putting little band-aids on small problems and trying to solve for, like, small things one at a time, or we'll add a system here and then we'll find a new problem and we'll think, okay, well, we'll add the system here, instead of getting really kind of at that 30,000 foot view again and thinking about how all of the journey works together. So the second thing that happens when organizations really audit their employee journey is that it's going to allow you to identify where those inefficiencies are, where gaps exist, bottlenecks, silos, right? Obstacles, whatever word you want to use. So for example, I was working through this exercise with a client a few months ago. And they were an organization that they were scaling and growing. And so, as you can imagine, and many of you probably have experienced or are currently experiencing, that as you're scaling and growing, I mean, it just absolutely complicates your processes. You're having to fold in, new processes, try to eliminate old processes. But when we were working through this employee journey mapping, which I'll share more about in a moment, we were in a room and we spent 2 hours as a small HR team working on that together. And within 2 hours, we had identified, I want to say it was 5 or 6 processes that were causing most of the headache. And it was funny because the HR manager said, we do this every single day, and we had never made this specific connection about this bottleneck and, this inefficiency that existed, because we just weren't asking the right questions. We just weren't doing a good enough kind of job auditing and reflecting. And it does take time. It takes time to kind of you have to set aside a little bit of time to do the audit, but it's very worth it for this. The other thing it does, and this one gets me really pumped up, is that it helps you distinguish when you start the audit process. It helps you distinguish between what is just activity and what is actually impactful, so that you can improve alignment. So similar, to the story I just shared, is I was working with a different organization, and one of the things that we identified was that they had this one particular process where there was so much redundancy. They had like 3 different people essentially performing the same task, and there wasn't visibility on it. There wasn't a way really prior to us having this conversation for them to piece together how inefficient they were being because of their, how they distributed their workflow. So it's going to allow you to kind of differentiate between what's actually moving the needle for us and what's just activity that somebody's doing that actually is going to be redone by somebody else or isn't going to, it's not going to move the needle. So that's why we want to focus on the employee journey. And so my practical, tactical call to you, that would be sort of the theoretical before, is to engage in a process called employee journey mapping. Now, the way that process plays out for your organization is going to be unique because, again, your different sizes, your different scopes, there's so much diversity here. But what employee journey mapping is it's a process that you can use to really understand like your current state, right? The current state of those different stages in the employee experience within your company. When you engage in this process, what it does is it's going to align the organization, the entire organization, on a common view of the actual employee experience. So one of the things I see constantly in my consulting work is so much misalignment where this department doesn't realize the functions under this department with respect to the employee experience. You've got, managers, people managers who aren't aligned with the HR function, who aren't understanding the role that they play. So when you engage at an organizational level in this employee mapping, it's going to help align everybody, thus increasing efficiency and decreasing inefficiencies. It's going to help you focus your employee experience program on the moments that matter most. And for every single HR leader I know, that's why you do the work that you do. That's what keeps you going, is that you care about the thriving and the flourishing of your organization, and you care about the organization's success, and you need to have engaged and fruitful and productive employees who have strong well-being to make that happen. So by doing this employee mapping, it really helps with that. It's also going to help you facilitate employee-centric thinking and actions. It's going to prioritize resources and funding, and it's going to help you clarify critical roles. So in general, when you're thinking about employee journey mapping, and again, this will be different for everybody. Everybody on the webinar will have maybe a different process that works. But what I recommend is that you spend an amount of time with either you may be HR department of one. So maybe it's you and an owner, or it's you and your small HR team. It may be a larger team, but that you spend time really digging in and auditing your employee journey with respect to different types of employee roles. Because, for example, your part-time seasonal employees journey is very different than your, middle-level managers employee journey. And so the very best organizations who do this well and then who see the fruit of it are those that segment to different types of employees. And I promise you, it may sound really overwhelming to think about that, but it really does just take some time, just put aside for some reflection, and the truth, the stuff is going to float to the surface very quickly. That's going to help you take action based on what you're hearing. So you're going to segment based on employees. And then you're going to try to audit what is the experience like for these different employee groups. Some organizations like to create really cool visual representations. You could probably Google, employee map template, and there'd be a lot of examples. I hesitate to share a specific template just because I see every single day how unique every single organization is. And so templates can sometimes get in the way of that. But what I am a big fan of is really great questions that spur creative thinking with HR teams. And so I want to share with you, I have a PDF download that you can use if you wanted to work through a process of employee journey mapping with your organization. I need like 3 more hours with you, which I'm sure you'd be just thrilled with hanging out with me for another 3 hours. But I wish I had more time to really go through a lot of these questions and kind of unpack them with you. But this document has questions kind of organized by the employee journey, like the part of the employee journey. So the attraction phase, hiring and onboarding, engagement. And so these are questions that you could use to really help spur you on in your employee journey mapping. So you can download it there, or you can shoot me an email if you want me to send you a copy. But this document would be a really, really great way for you to take this back to your team. It's just a cool tool for you to take back to your team to engage in that process. In general, though, you want to be asking in your journey mapping some broader questions. Like once you're identifying all of the steps, the processes, is that together collectively, you and your team, you're asking questions like, okay, which specific processes are consuming most of our time and resources? It's funny because, you read that question, you think, well, that doesn't sound super insightful. But what happens is we get in such a rhythm and such, again, that hamster wheel kind of mentality because of just the nature of our job, that we don't take time to pause and go, oh, it's this very specific thing that's causing us so much, inefficiency. Are these steps necessary? So like I shared a moment ago, when I was working with my client, we were able to just eliminate several processes that were absolutely redundant and unnecessary and freed up a ton of time and space for them. Are there opportunities for automation or for other efficiency gains? We'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's a question to really drive, to kind of drive you forward in this conversations, is looking at all these steps and saying, are there tools? Is there technology? How can we leverage the systems we already have in place? How can we leverage the talent that we already have in place to, improve efficiency? And then, of course, a question that we're all probably asking, as HR and people leaders is, are our policies and procedures, are they really as clear and as fair as we think they are? And are they consistently applied across the organization? So another client I was working with, this was another situation where they had scaled and grown. And as is very normal, one department in particular was kind of hesitant. I will say that's a nice way of saying it, was a little bit hesitant to adopt some of these new processes and new procedures that were hopefully going to be applied, organizationally wide. Said that awkwardly. But what they identified with this department was that there was really a lot of miscommunication and misalignment from the top, right? And also from the HR function about what the expectations were with respect to the workflow. And so once they were able to identify that and then tackle that takes care of some of that change management piece, right? So these are just, again, some very broad questions to ask. But the overall kind of takeaway for this particular strategy is it's so much about reflection and auditing that it can seem like it's slowing you down. I will sometimes liken it to when you're going to clean out a closet, it looks worse before it gets better. But then when it's better, you're like, how was I living like that before? This is tremendously, more helpful for us and for our family or whatever. So in the same way, it's you creating time and space to analyze and audit your employee journey. And again, you can use those questions. You could probably find a lot of great questions online as well to really help you with that employee journey. But when you do that, it's going to free you up to identify those bottlenecks and obstacles that you're facing. Okay. The other thing I would say about this particular strategy is, take notes and create documentation for each phase of the journey if you can. Identify areas where you can maximize, and then also think about who specifically is going to own specific steps of that employee journey. And then lastly, don't get discouraged that you're not doing all the things. I have seen organizations burn themselves out because when they do an audit like this, they think we've got to fix everything overnight. And that's, as you know, not a great strategy either. So focus on streamlining and improving that employee experience in just a few areas. Kaylee, I'm curious, are there any questions or anything going on in the chat that I can speak to before we move on to this second strategy?
Nope, nothing major in the chat right now for you, LeAnne.
Awesome. Well, that's good news. If you do have questions, let us know, and we'll hop in and answer them. So, okay, let's move on and let's talk about strategy number 2, which is all about really getting you better data and better information to make decisions. So again, the strategy is more about communication, and it's more about your kind of just people-centric in general, right? So what we want to do here as a strategy is we want to dial up our employee listening efforts. And as a result of that, depending on the size of our organization, have better access to analytics, to people analytics that help us make more informed decisions. So in case that term, like employee listening strategy, is a new one to you, I love AIHR's definition of employee listening strategy because I think it's just very simple. And that is, it's an orchestrated effort by an organization to better understand the people in your organization, thus improving the employee experience. So strategy 1, right, with the employee journey mapping was all about you thinking about, from the organization standpoint, here's the journey. employee listening is about going, hey, we want to create upward communication channels where we're keeping our finger on the pulse of how our employees are feeling, what problems they're identifying, what bottlenecks they see or feel. And by doing that, we're going to put ourselves in a position to make better decisions, thus saving ourselves time, money, right, resources. I always think it's important to kind of differentiate between two types of listening strategies. Historically, most organizations adopted what we call an episodic listening strategy. And so many organizations still operate this way. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with it. I just think there's kind of a better way, especially for today's employee. But episodic listening would be when an organization schedules just a few kind of large scale listening events where they're gathering, feedback. Often that's housed under, the HR function. And so many of you may be operating under kind of episodic listening, which is still, hear me say, very important. Like if you're not doing anything, do episodic listening. Make sure you are creating listening posts for your employees. But what we find helps organizations more today with optimizing both their processes and also the employee experience is moving to what we call a continuous listening strategy. And in this case, it's more integrated, it's more strategic, and you're embedding employee listening throughout the employee life cycle, right? Throughout the entire employee experience. So instead of just doing one employee engagement survey a year, which by the way, I'm not a hater on the actually help organizations facilitate those annual employee engagement surveys. So I'm not hating on it. But if that's all you're doing, you want to think maybe about how you can embed listening across the employee life cycle, because again, by doing so, you're going to get better information. So 4 principles of continuous listening that you could kind of think up to yourself, how does my organization stack up with respect to this listening strategy is one, that because you've done the work in strategy number 1, which is all about your auditing and kind of thinking about your systems and all that good stuff, you know that you've got the right training tools and technology in place so that employees can constantly access upward communication channels. So it would be the annual employee engagement survey that they know happens every November. It would also be, hey, I know that in my one-on-ones with my manager, for example, that every week I have an opportunity to share and I feel safe. I've got the psychological safety to communicate up about problems, that I have. Your managers know when problems are communicated. Here's a process because of that employee journey, right? Here's a process that I can use to communicate that to HR or to communicate that to leadership. So it's all streamlined because everybody's aligned about how communication flows in an organization. Most organizations focus their communication efforts on, you guessed it, downward communication, and often don't do it very well based on research on, how employees feel about organizational communication. But when organizations do a really good job of optimizing, it's because they're creating more upward communication channels for information to flow up. So think about this. What kind of channels do you have in your organization where employees can communicate up? Because when you create more of them in a continuous listening strategy, you're going to see so much more data come to your table, or just information. Maybe data could sound a little daunting. Okay, principle number 2 for continuous listening is that you're asking the right questions. And when I say asking the right questions, what I mean by that is organizations that have really robust employee listening are those that ask both quantitative and qualitative questions. So for example, you may be creating upward channels, about your onboarding processes. So let's say you have part of your employee journey in that onboarding phase is after onboarding finishes, there's a survey sent. How, hey, where can we add clarity? Where was there ambiguity? How welcomed did you feel by your manager? I mean, you know this stuff. So you're asking questions that are quantitative, but you're also providing opportunities for qualitative feedback to flow up. Qualitative feedback meaning that, employees have a way to give rich description and not just like check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or yes or no on a survey. So continuous listening requires that you're eliciting both quantitative and qualitative feedback. And again, the whole goal here is that you're getting better information so that you and your fellow leaders can make smarter decisions that save you time, money, and energy. The other thing I would say here for a principal is that you're creating feedback loops and sharing that collective voice with your employees. And what that does is it helps with alignment. So let's say, for example, that you have an onboarding survey and you have just recently restructured your onboarding processes and you want to see, is it working? Are we seeing improvement? And so you've got a survey that you send out, and the data that you're getting back is saying, maybe it's not helping quite as much, doesn't seem like we're noticing that much of a difference. Then that helps you take action, but it also gives you an opportunity to create downward communication and let your team members, let managers, whatever know, here's what we're hearing. This is actually, it's not efficient. It's not working. We're going to adapt. We're going to switch. We're going to tweak some things, right? So by creating those feedback loops, you are optimizing like crazy. And again, the fourth principle here is that we're actually acting on what we're learning. It's not enough just to capture the data or just to, get the employee feedback and create the upward channel if you're not then taking action to streamline and to create better processes. So for example, when we're thinking about better decision making, imagine a world in which you have built a continuous listening strategy. And so you're getting this upward communication, you're identifying areas where there are gaps between what you would hope would happen in your employee journey and what's actually happening. That gives you an opportunity to, again, make those better decisions, enhance employee engagement, reduce turnover, to improve your hiring and onboarding processes, to streamline them, to boost performance and productivity. And also, depending on the size of your organization and the tools that you're using, to get you some predictive analytics, right? I work with an organization, and one of the things that we focus on is heavily is turnover, and that we have actually over time identified some predictive analytics when it comes to predicting turnover that seem to be very helpful in helping the leaders make decisions about all sorts of things. So when you are improving your listening, it leads to better decisions. So again, it feels like a 30,000 foot view, and it is a 30,000 foot view strategy, but it's worth it. It's so worth it. So I want to give you an example. And here's the thing, I don't want to bury the lead. So I have been hearing a lot of questions about the rise of AI in, HR. I mean, every industry is like, how is AI going to affect us? And while the use of AI is outside of the scope of this particular presentation, because for one, I do not by any stretch of the imagination consider myself to be competent in it quite yet. But what I wanted to show you is an example of how AI can actually support an HR function. And so when I was working on this presentation, I put in ChatGPT. So I have the paid version of ChatGPT. I'm still working it out, but I put in the prompt an example. I said, I'm building a webinar on this. This is some of the research I'm going to include. These are the points I want to make. And then I said, hey, could you create, based on this research and based on what typically organizations can expect to see when they engage in employee journey mapping and when they improve their employee listening, based on that research, could you create like a pretend case study for me? And I didn't have to create a pretend one, but I thought it was interesting to even consider could AI help with some of those things, right? So I prompted it, and what you're seeing on these next 3 slides is what the technology put together for me. And so I wanted to show you that. So just so you know, I did not write these slides, but it's an example of how, as I was working, I thought, okay, how could I get smarter and leverage my time even more effectively and utilize a tool? So I know there's a lot of questions about AI, but I just wanted to show you that. So this would be an example of an organization that is mid-sized, specializing in innovative cloud solutions. They're dealing with a lot of inefficiencies. So what they're going to do is they're going to focus on their employee journey, and their employee listening. Okay. And then we will see, based on what typically organizations can expect, the outcomes that they received. So here is a little bit of their background, which I shared. So the problem, right, is going consistently over budget. Deadlines are missed. So you can already hear lack of that alignment. You can already hear some employee journey concerns. Resources are not effectively allocated. Again, employee journey concerns. Employee morale is low due to perceived mismanagement and poor communication, right? So and this may sound very familiar to some of you who find yourself in situations like that, but what's happening here is that, the organization starts to feel stretched, and HR leaders in particular start to feel very overwhelmed because of these inefficiencies. So what does this hypothetical organization do? Is they're going to implement an employee listening program, and then they're going to leverage those people analytics to make better decisions. And they're going to conduct anonymous surveys, one-on-one interviews, maybe, regular town hall meetings. They're going to gather data, process it to identify themes, and then present it to make more informed decisions, right? And so check this out. This is, again, based on what the real research is that ChatGPT says, here's the results that Starlight Enterprises, could at least experience. So I'm going to just throw all of these up here. I won't read through all of them. Trust me, I'm breaking like every public speaking slide rule I ever had, but I wanted to show you that this was, that my students would be like, what is this? But I wanted to show you this because ChatGPT kind of crafted this. And again, it's based on what the real research suggests will happen when you start implementing these strategies that we've talked about. But improved time management, right? So 20% reduction in project completion time because you're identifying specific meetings that are inefficient or redundant, right? Cost reduction. Employees are pointing out areas where costs could be saved without compromising. For example, and I see this one all the time. So I was like, ooh, when this popped up in the ChatGPT, because it says some expensive third-party software tools were rarely used while in-house solutions were deemed sufficient. So employees were actually communicating up, hey, we don't need this. So phasing out those tools led to a cost reduction, better resource utilization, and then of course, enhanced employee morale. So this is kind of like a meta type slide situation, is that I wanted to show you what some of the benefits were in the research, but also do that using a new tool that we have at our disposal. And so the way that you use, for example, something like AI in your organization, TBD, to be determined. But I do think it's interesting to consider, how could we start leveraging tools like that in our employee listening and also in our employee journey mapping, right? So that's just an example. So strategy number one is to focus on auditing your employee journey to identify those areas of concern. Strategy two is about building a continuous listening strategy, a lot of strategy words, continuous listening strategy to help you make more informed decisions and really to move the needle on the things that matter most to your employees. And so strategy number three, which is out of these three, I would say is definitely the most like concrete in terms of, hey, you could go like implement this today. That is to absolutely lean into HR tech and automate. So I will share with you, I've had several organizations that I work with who have made a transition from, doing strictly manual, processing into using HR tech. And every single one of them, what they say is, I'm mad that we didn't do it sooner. Every single one of them. I'm mad I didn't do it sooner because it has shifted what we're able to focus on. And so I would love to know, maybe in the chat, is where is your organization with respect to HR tech? Some organizations will say, well, we're using it really more in kind of the attraction phase. Some would say, we use it again in maybe departing, or we use it mostly in performance management. The systems that we're using help us with employee listening here. But I'd be curious for you to think through, how are you currently, if you, at all, using HR technology? Because what the research says is that, and this is again kind of depressing if you're, if you're an HR people leader, is that HR specialists spend on average over 40% of their time on administrative work. Okay. And I mean so if you think about what your week is like, 40% of it, if 40% of that is spent on administrative work, I mean, that's keeping you from, and you feel this every day. John says, more than that. Absolutely, right? Depending on your organization. But if that's the case, think about how awesome it would be to have some of that time back to then do the things that technology can't do, that ChatGPT can't do, right? And that is to nurture and build relationships and create exceptional employee experience, right? So I'm seeing a lot of you, okay, so we only use it for culture survey and engagement surveys, Culture Amp, right? We use it for administrative work, implementing self-service tools. Yes, I'm going to touch on that in a minute. For onboarding, performance management. So every organization has sort of maybe dipped their toe in or is fully, operating through HR technology. But check this one out. Currently, what the research says is about 23% of HR teams. And so again, that would include like huge, organizations and also your small organizations. 23% still rely on paper-based HR administration. And so when I see that, I think to myself, these are individuals who are representing their organizations, who are spending so much time on these manual processes that they're not freed, right? They don't have time. They don't have, the budget. They don't have the resources to do the things that really are going to move the ball forward for the organization with respect to employee engagement. Maria, I see, because we're a Japanese company and they love paper. I hear that. I actually really love paper too. Like I still have a written to-do list. I've very slowly tried to adopt a more, I guess, efficient calendaring system, but I'm still kind of a paper person too. However, I have seen over and over and over again the power of automating as much as you can, and that freeing up your teams to accomplish so much more than they would have ever been able to do otherwise. So again, just a couple of examples of ways I have seen HR tech change my clients' lives, my HR clients' lives, is one, improving the employee experience. One interesting thing is I had a conversation not too long ago with a Gen Z, so a young, kind of fresh out of college applicant. And she told me, I thought was fascinating. She said, I stop the application process if it is clear to me that they're not using technology and automation. And while she was just one person, and so I don't want to be, I don't want to overgeneralize. I thought it was fascinating that she said, to me, that says something about the organization. If they're not using, because she grew up with that. She grew up with using, technology and automation in her life. But in a broader sense to this point, your HR technology can improve the employee experience because it's going to reduce uncertainty for employees. So we mentioned self-service a minute ago. So I have seen firsthand employees say, having the ability to access my information, to get, to know where to go, to get what I need, to make changes where I'm able to make changes, has made me feel more empowered as an employee. It makes me feel more valued. It makes me feel more equipped. I have one client that just recently, we were kind of going through some employee engagement survey analysis. And one of the things that they discovered, the leadership discovered, was they had so many benefits, amazing benefits, that employees didn't even realize. They probably saw it in a handbook, when they first signed up to work there, but they weren't taking advantage of these incredible benefits because it wasn't easily accessible. And so that was something that they decided to work on, was how can we create some self-service options, create some spaces where employees can access this information, and that's going to improve employee experience. Number two, I'm pulling up something weird on my computer there. HR tech can provide you with dependable workflows and processes. There's so many great tools out there. Now, admittedly, I am a little biased, and this is a GoCo webinar. So GoCo is a fantastic tool. There are other great tools out there too, but HR Tech can provide you with dependable workflows and processes. So the clients I have who have made the switch are saying things like, I no longer have to customize these documents over and over again. The workflow is already there. I know that when I onboard an employee, that we have a streamlined process because if they're hanging with me, they're doing employee journey mapping, we have this process that it builds an exceptional employee experience, but it's also improving our lives tremendously because things are automated, right? It's also going to remove manual tedious admin tasks from your to-do list. This is a sneaky good impact. And this, maybe you wouldn't be surprised that I would focus on this, but HR Tech actually improves internal communication and consistency quite a bit. Because remember earlier I mentioned that department that was kind of wanting to stay kind of rogue. They wanted to sort of stay in their own kind of previously existing structures and processes. When you adopt HR Tech, it doesn't make it, of course, it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve every problem, but it improves internal communication and consistency across the board. And what I will tell you is that with the clients I work with, streamlining that improves departmental collaboration. And actually, not too long ago, we saw one of my clients and I saw an improvement in their engagement scores, specifically in the areas of collaboration, interdepartmental collaboration. And we could really see, and while correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, I feel like, because of what I know, that their implementation of HR Tech to streamline with their performance management processes, their workflows, where it's affecting different departments, it was tremendously helpful in their perceptions of collaboration, their experience of collaboration. So it can help with that. It can help with, again, empowering employees with self-service. Cannot overstate how important that is. Can help you track really important workforce metrics, and can improve your data management and your data security, right? And what do you know? I ran out of space again on this one. Truly, HR Tech for me has been a way to take my clients to the next level when it comes to figuring out their processes and their procedures. So HR Tech, if you haven't dipped your toe in, I would encourage you to do that. And if you already have, one thing I would say is try to think with respect to your employee journey, how you might find solutions that solve multiple problems. Because another thing I see, and I mentioned earlier, is organizations that have put Band-Aids on those individual employee like touch points, and they put a little technology Band-Aid here and a little one here, and this is a different program, and we use that for that. Well, that naturally is going to increase inefficiency in your organization. So figure out, are there ways to sort of streamline and use an all-in-one platform, something that's going to give us a robust offerings. Another thing I will say with this one is, as is always the case, there are potential pitfalls involved with, HR Tech or really any kind of, automation, that these would be some questions that you could ask with your teams, your HR teams, your leadership teams. Things like, okay, what specific problem are we trying to solve here? And that is a question that you can really answer if you go through that employee journey mapping that we talked about before. Where is the bottleneck? Where is the silo? Where is the problem? Okay, if we were to adopt this, HR Tech or this solution, how specifically will it simplify our workflows? Because in some cases, I have seen organizations that have tried to adopt all the bells and whistles, and it was too much. It was too much, and it actually wasn't simplifying. So that's why the employee journey mapping is so important, because it's going to help you figure out what's the specific problem and how specifically is this going to solve the problem or simplify the workflow. We don't want to just get kind of like shiny object syndrome either. We want to make sure we're making logical, evidence-based decisions. So how's it going to improve efficiency? Does it align with our strategic goals? So an example of this, one of my clients, from their employee listening efforts, they were identifying, as is the case for many organizations, that they were struggling to communicate how much they valued their employees. And this is something I see all the time. I work with executive teams quite a bit. And I hear and sense and feel how much they want to communicate their value and give recognition away and dial up the praise, efforts. But there's often a disconnect between what we think is going to make impact and what actually makes impact. And so that's why the employee listening is so important. But this particular organization identified, wow, we have such an interesting dynamic in our workplace, and the way that we operate. It's hard for us to deliver, for example, like traditional one-on-ones. So we're going to need to think about adopting maybe, some software that allows us to facilitate praise and recognition, through technology, as opposed to maybe embedding it in some of those more traditional management rhythms. That was very unique to that organization that aligned with their strategic goals. So it's asking yourself, does it really align? Is it scalable? How user-friendly is it? What are their security measures? That's another big one. How will it integrate with our existing systems? That's another reason why your employee journey mapping is just so very important. And I know you're like, you've said that 45 times, but I really hope that one of the things you walk away with is if you will start there, the rest of it almost becomes, I don't want to say that may be too much. I don't want to say self-evident, but in my experience in these meetings, the truth really does kind of float to the surface, and it sort of feels in the room much more self-evident, the actions that we need to take to improve efficiencies. What kind of support and training does X program, software, platform provide? These are questions that you don't want to just, jump too quickly without really analyzing, is this going to improve the problem, or is this going to complicate and add more, just headache on what already feels like a really chaotic, work environment. So that would be strategy number 3, is this idea that after you're doing your employee journey mapping, you're auditing what's going well, you're maximizing, you're dialing up your listening efforts to get better data, to make better decisions, that you're thinking tactically about how you might really lean into HR tech to automate as much as you can, thus freeing you up to do more of what only humans can do, right? Care and nurture for the people in your organizations, which is, again, the driving force for every HR leader that I know. So, okay, I would love to hear in the chat, because I know this can all feel very, very overwhelming. I never want to stress anybody out or make anybody feel overwhelmed. So I would love for you to think of just what's one thing, and put it in the chat for me. I would love to see what's one thing that you think you could do as a result of what we've covered today, because small changes actually add up to big, big impact. So what's at least one thing that you think you could do as a result of what we've covered today? I'm looking in. Audit. I love it. Automate interviewing. Love it. Listening sessions. I love it. I was trying to catch what Michelle says. We call it the sparkle effect. I may have to scroll back so I can figure that one out. But I love, Kaylee's popped in here about small to medium-sized businesses. I will tell you that I think GoCo is fantastic for anyone, but for small businesses, I've I've sent several of my clients to GoCo for that. So I love it. Automation, regular listening sessions, the mapping. I love it. I love it. Here's the thing. If you start making small changes like this, I'm telling you, you're going to see major change happen very quickly. So thank you so much. I would love to connect with you. So if you wanted to download those employee journey questions, again, that document is going to give you really great questions to help you think through every single phase of the life cycle. I'm also really active on LinkedIn, so I'd love to connect with you there. My website's there. So if you have any questions, you want to shoot me an email, I would love to do that. Kaylee, I will pass it back over to you. I think we've got just a little bit of time, but thanks so much, everyone, for being here.
Yes, LeAnne, that was amazing. As always, I'm not surprised. We always love having you on our GoCo webinars, so thank you for that. For everyone, I put the SHRM code in the chat. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know. My email address is kaylee.hansen@goco.io. Just a little self GoCo promo. We do have a coffee offer. So if you decide that you would like to meet with GoCo, chat with us, learn a little bit more about our HR technology, you can go to goco.io/coffee. One thing that we went to SHRM conference a few weeks ago, and one thing that I kept telling people is I like to think of GoCo as kind of the Chipotle of the HR tech world, because you can really just pick and choose what you want. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So,
Oh my gosh, I love it.
so if you'd like to set some time aside with us, let me know. Let me share that SHRM code in the chat one more time with everyone, just so they have it. There we go. And I will be sending this recording as well as the slides out probably tomorrow. So keep an eye on for that. But otherwise, LeAnne, it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me, Kaylee.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And with that, I will see you later, LeAnne. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.